Hi folks, and welcome back to West Yorkshire Retro Gamer. Today I'm going to grade all of the 24 teams that competed in the EFL Championship season 24-25 and grade them on how good their season has been, based on a number of different factors, individual club expectations, positions, points, goals scored, goals conceded, wins, draws, losses, you name it. We're going to try and cover as much as we can without keeping the video any longer than it has to be. So, without further ado, let's get straight in. And we'll do it all alphabetically, so we'll start with Blackburn Rovers. I'm going to say Blackburn's had a good season. They started out pretty well, and then lost their manager, and then when they got the new manager, it was a very slow recovery, but they did recover and finished the season very well. So we can't say that they've had a great season, but they did finish comfortably above expectation from a general standpoint, in that they lost their main talisman Sammy Smodics, and were still able to finish 7th, only 2 points outside of the playoff. So a very decent return and very good form towards the end of the season as well. I have the figures for the last 5 games for all 24 teams, and they were unbeaten in those 5. So, overall, good season for Blackburn. Bristol City, I'd say they've had a great season. They are usually expected to be mid-table. However, they finished the season with 17 wins and 17 draws, with just 12 losses, and ended up finishing in 6th place, which is a little bit higher than I think most of us had Bristol to finish. Me personally, I had Blackburn to be relegated once they lost Smodics, because I didn't think that they'd really kind of reinvested it all that great. And with Bristol, I had them mid-table. I think these 2 grades for the first 2 teams is pretty fair. So moving on, Burnley, I have to say great. Yes, their expectations were obviously to get promoted at the first time of asking. Have they gone about it in the most stylish and flamboyant way? Not really. But have they set a couple of records? Yes. Only lost 2 games all season, only conceded 16 goals all season, and scored 100 points, and had won, at the very least, the final 5 games of the season. So they've achieved their objective at the first attempt, and done it in an extremely impressive defensive style. As I say, not necessarily pretty on the eyes at times, but they have achieved what they were looking to achieve. So, moving on, Cardiff City have done the opposite of Burnley. They've been relegated, finishing bottom, and Cardiff are a team that you, more often than not, you'd expect to be in a mid-table-ish kind of area. At the very, very least, you would expect them to survive in the division. They were the only team to get less than double-figure wins all season, with a mere 9. 9 wins is not going to keep you up in an EFL division. It just isn't. It's not enough. So, with this in mind, they scored a very paltry 44 points, which is 6 points off the kind of minimum target that most clubs kind of aim for, with a view to surviving. It's not great. So, yeah, safe to say that Cardiff City, a rubbish season for the Blues. They will be feeling blue after that one. Moving on to the Sky Blues of Coventry City. I would say good. Started off the season really poorly, and made the difficult decision to get rid of Mark Robins, who had been a long-serving manager for them up to that point, and relatively successful for them in that time as well. And ultimately, they have achieved a playoff place, getting in 5th in the end, but they were expected at the start of the season to be at least in and around that top 6 area. So they've certainly not overachieved. They've had a good season, but with the early season problems, we can't say that they've had a great season by expectation. So, moving on to Derby County. This might come across a little harsh, but I'm going to say average. And the reason I say average is because they've achieved their objective, but their two nearest rivals in terms of the other two teams promoted directly from League One last season in Portsmouth and Oxford have done better than Derby. For me, it's very close between good and average. A lot of people will look at Derby finishing in 19th place out of 24 and saying they've had a good season, which, it could be argued that yes, maybe they have. They finished with 13 wins, 11 draws and 22 losses, so you've got to think that, you've lost nearly half your games in the entire season. That, for me, is what really dropped it down to average. And you've only scored 48 goals. You've only scored over 2 goals over an average of 1 a game. It's not brilliant. And so these are relatively small reasons. They got the 50 points, which was comfortable to stay up in the end, which is great. But again, it's that number of losses for me. I just think if you're losing almost half of your games in an entire season, can you say it's a good season, even for a team that's just come up? I don't know. Very close between average and good. But I don't think saying average is unfair. I know that the resources were probably less than several of the other teams in the division, but I'll go with average. I don't think that's drastically unfair. They're very close to having the good rating. Very close. Moving on to Hull City. Now then. Hull finished 21st and only just finished above the relegation zone. Does it go down as a rubbish season? Very close. I'm going to say poor, which I don't think is unfair. 12 wins, 13 draws, 21 losses. But for a team that, quite a few seasons ago were Premier League, and with the money that the owner really Charlie pumps into the club, with transfers and good loan signings, it was a terrible appointment bringing in Tim Walter. They got rid of him fairly quick. To only finish on 49 points, so he's very poor, and very lucky to stay up on that particular basis. Really, anything less than 50, and you probably deserve to go down. Really. So yeah, certainly on that. If you think of how close Derby are from going from average to good, that's how close Hull are from going from poor to rubbish, in my opinion. It's not a good season for Hull. They will need to do some stuff this summer to avoid that kind of situation happening again. And again, actually, again, if you look at it, only 44 goals scored in the entire season. That's less than a goal a game, and that's less than what Derby scored. So, again, I certainly can't put them in average, nowhere near. But I was very tempted to put them in rubbish. But we'll put them in poor. Moving on to my team, Leeds. Great season. Finished as champions. A lot of similarities to Burnley, but kind of the opposite in a sense. Both teams finished on 100 points. But Leeds' attack compared to Burnley's defence, that's where the main difference is. Leeds still very good defensively, with the second best defence in the entire division, with just 30 goals conceded, but with a whopping 95 goals scored. Again, if Leeds had scored another 5 goals in the season, then maybe Leeds' attack would be talked about as much as Burnley's defence has been. Who knows? But they've only lost 4 games all season. Won the most games in the season there with 29. plus goal difference 65, way more than anyone else. I'll say way more. I mean, better than Burnley with the 53. So yeah, I don't think it's unfair to say that Leeds have not had a great season. The expectation was definitely there for to require promotion, which is what they've got, and ultimately, they've got promotion as champions. So I don't think it's unfair. If we're saying Burnley's had a great season, I don't think it's unfair to say that my team Leeds have had a great season as well. Moving on. Luton Town, quite the opposite. Boom. I don't think that can be argued, really. They've just come down from the Premier League. Carlton Morris, a proven scorer at this level, and they've got in a double relegation, 2 seasons, 2 relegations. Pretty shocking. A lot of stuff is going to have to go down at Luton to improve things and see if they can come back at the first attempt, but I don't think there's any guarantee. That losing mentality has got to be removed. I mean, their form at the end of the season wasn't terrible. 3 wins and 2 losses, but those wins have obviously come too little, too late, and ultimately they've been relegated on goal difference. Hull City would have been relegated. Now, if Hull City had been relegated, Hull would have been in the rubbish category. Their survival has just about kept them up in the poor category. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to harp on it too much with Luton. The fans will already be suffering enough. But a lot of stuff needs to change there if it's going to improve, and if they're going to actually come straight back up. Moving on to Middlesbrough. I'm going to say average, which is, you could argue Middlesbrough being in either good, average or poor, depending on how you view it. A club of their stature should be really aiming for top 6. They've finished 10th. Now, even though there's quite a gap between 6th and 10th, points-wise, there is only 4 points of a gap. Middlesbrough have been quite free scoring at certain times in the season, but at the end of the day, a team that's expecting to get top 6, and a lot of YouTube creators are kind of put them in the running for the top 2. They're absolutely nowhere near the top 2. You can't really say any higher than average, really, based on the expectation of the club. So, moving on, Millwall. I'm going to say they've had a good season. Millwall is a club that a lot of people expect to finish mid-table. They finished 8th and only finished 2 points off the playoffs. Very respectable defensive record, only conceding 49 out of the 46 games. But their downfall was their attacking prowess of only scoring 47. Not great. But to finish as high as 8th for a team that's expecting mid-table, very respectable. So a good season for Millwall, I would say. Moving on to Norwich. I'm going to say average. A little bit like Middlesbrough in a sense. Like, Norwich have had 2 players that have been exceptional in front of goal this season with Sains and Sargent. But despite all of these goal-scoring prowesses, with a pretty impressive tally of 71 goals scored, which, if I'm right, is the second highest goals scored in the entire division after Leeds. So they've had no problems getting goals. It's keeping them out that has been the problem. With an absolutely whopping 68, which is a very large amount for a team that has finished mid-table. And the expectation of Norwich would have been that especially with that kind of strike force, or at least those kind of attacking players, that you would expect Norwich to be a playoff contender. As it happens, they finished with a bit of a whimper on 57, 13th place. Lost more games than they drew or won, with 14 wins and 15 draws. I mean, it's pretty even across the board with those three, isn't it, really? But, you know, when Bristol got 68, Norwich only mustered 57. Quite a gap. So I think average at best is fair. You could almost go borderline poor, but no, I think average is fair. Oxford. Now then. Ooh. I'm going to say great. I really am, right? And I mean, I was conflicted between good and great. But, you know, when you think of the size of the club, I mean, their stadium only has 3 stands, for Christ's sake. I mean, it's balmy. But for a club of Oxford's size, and they finished on 53 points, which is very, very respectable in their first season back in the Championship after a long time out of it. You know, 13 wins, 14 draws, 19 losses, 49 scored. 65 conceded is a little steep, but again, they kind of combated that when Rowett came in as manager. You know, they got rid of Buckingham, brought in Rowett, and he very much steadied the ship. Finished on 53 points. You know, 53. If you were getting relegated on 53, that'd be so harsh. That'd be a lot of points to get relegated on, really. But for a team that was expected to be relegated, it's the expectation for Oxford that, for me, puts them in great. And yeah, for me, I think that is quite fair. You know, because they, if I remember rightly, they were quite a way off Derby and Portsmouth in League One and came up through the playoffs. So for them to finish as solid as 17th place, you know, I mean 17th, it's a good chunk away from the bottom 3 in it, really. So I'm torn between good and great. You know, there are some figures in there that are a little iffy, and they will need to improve if they're going to stay up again. You know, the following season. You don't want second season syndrome kind of thing. But yeah, I'm very close between great and good for them. I don't think it's too unfair. I think some people would say great for Oxford, some would say good for Oxford. So it's borderline between good and great for me. Plymouth. They've had a tale of two halves, haven't they? Really. Like, I'm going to say poor. Now, again, they would be borderline between poor and rubbish. Some might even argue average. But I'm gonna give my argument here for Plymouth. You have to look at the ownership. Why did they hire Rooney? They could have hired me and I would have done a better job. He is proven to be a very poor manager, and God knows what he said in his interview with the ownership to persuade Plymouth to give him a job. I don't think I'm being overly harsh there. Rooney's track record as a manager overall is poor. And for a team like Plymouth, who needed someone that was just going to keep a steady ship, I mean, one of the examples I can give is the 2 matches that Plymouth played against Leeds United this season. The first one, where they were managed by Rooney, they were terrible. They were so open. It was like a hot knife through butter. It really was. They were shocking. And then in the final fixture of the season, they'd lost, by this point, they'd lost Whittaker, who was their best attacking player. Change manager. I mean, alright, they were already just about confirmed relegated. But they were a lot better. They were a much tougher test. You know, and you know, Muslik, the new manager, if they can keep him, and if they can maybe keep the likes of Bundu and Mumba, players like that, then I could see Plymouth coming straight back up. I really could. Muslik, got them playing far, far better. And, when you look at it on face value, conceding 88 goals is shambolic. And that minus 37 goal difference in the end is what has contributed to them going down. But within their last 5 games, they'd won 3 and lost 2. And bearing in mind the final loss was against Leeds on the final day. They've had 11 wins, 13 draws and 22 losses. Scored 51, but it's that conceding of the 88 and finishing on 46 points, which is, again, as we know, ain't good enough if you're going to stay up. But again, the expectation of Plymouth was that, to just finish just above the relegation zone, and they took it to the final day, at least mathematically, or say the final 2 matches of the season. They took it. They took it as close to the wire as they could. If they'd have hired Muslik earlier, they'd have stayed up for me, which is why I'm not putting their season in rubbish. So, yeah, there we go with Plymouth. Who's next? Portsmouth. So again, this is a little controversial. I'm going to put them in good. Now, you see, I've kind of judged the 3 teams who all came up and kind of decided where to put them accordingly. But then against the expectation and the size of the club and where these clubs may feel that they should be at. For me, I think Portsmouth, very passionate fan base. They pack out the stadium pretty much every week, don't they? As far as I've been made aware. And they stuck with the same manager for the entire season, which is interesting as well. They finished 16th, which is a good season for them. They did lose 20 games though, which was 1 more loss than Oxford. But again, they got 1 more win by getting 14 instead of 13. So it's been a very similar season. They only beat Oxford by 1 point in the end and 1 position. But I just feel that there was more expectation for Portsmouth to do better than both Derby and Oxford, and they did do. So in terms of the overall expectation, that's why it's good instead of great. But again, you could absolutely argue great, good or average for any of those 3 teams that have just come up. And again, this is just one person's opinion. My opinions aren't necessarily right or wrong, they're just an opinion. But again, take nothing away from what Portsmouth have done. They've come straight up and they've done a very solid season. 16th place, 54 points, again, clear of the relegation zone, unbeaten in the last 5 games, 2 wins and 3 draws. Conceded maybe a few too many, they conceded 71. But they scored 58, which again is very solid, for a team of that level. But again, with Portsmouth, you're talking of a team that was, had some good days in the Premier League, albeit quite some time ago. But again, the stature of the club certainly puts them there. So I think good is a fair reflection. But again, you could argue anywhere between great, good, and average. Same with all 3 teams that have just come up from League One. Moving on to Preston. Where did they finish? 20th. Terrible form at the end as well. I'm going to say poor. I'm going to say poor for Preston. I think Preston are a club that are seen as a mid-table team usually. They lost Ryan Lowe after 1 game, which was really weird. They brought in Eckingbottom. He did well at Barnsley, achieved what was expected of him at Sheffield United, and has come into Preston and steadied the ship enough, just about. But 10 wins, 20 draws, 50 points. They've conceded more than they've scored. They lost they lost 4 of the last 5 games, which is terrible form. Which was obviously gradually dragging them towards a relegation battle towards the end of the season there. So yeah, I don't think there's too many Preston fans that can say that it's been an average season, because I think an average season for Preston would be mid-table, and they've fallen well short of that in 20th place. So I don't think saying a poor season is unfair, really. Moving on to QPR. 56 points, 14 wins, 14 draws, minus goal difference, 15th place. Based on expectations, Cifuentes came in the season before and looked quite good. Maybe their expectations would have been a little higher than 15th. When you consider the team that they've been joined at the hip with for a little while in Sheffield Wednesday, were able to finish in the top half, in 12th. One of the smaller grounds in the division, so again, you're not going to get massive attendances or anything at Loftus Road. Oh, it's between average and poor, but again, what are the club's expectations? I'm going to say average. I'll be reasonably kind to Queens Park Rangers there. I don't think that the expectations were massive for them. They would be looking at having a more stable season, which by and large they have had a more stable season, certainly based on having 14 wins and 14 draws out of 46 games. It's not a disaster. 56 points in total. But yeah, I think just an average season, for them. I don't think that's too harsh, really. They haven't finished high enough for it to be seen as a good season. And with the hype that there was with Cifuentes seemingly improving Queens Park Rangers, has he improved them as much as what the trajectory was taking them? I'm not so certain. So I think that's fair. Sheffield United. I don't think it's unfair to say a good season. If you take Leeds and Burnley out of the equation, they are comfortably the next best team with 90 points. They've done what Leeds did the season before, where they've come down and finished in 3rd place with 90 points. They've done the exact same thing. They've got the 3rd best number of points. They've got the 3rd best goal difference, I think. Yes. They've got the joint 2nd best number of wins. The number of losses probably is what is knacking them up a bit here. Compared to 13 draws and 16 draws for Leeds and Burnley, they only drew 8 but lost 10. You can't really expect to lose 10 games and expect to get in the top 2, really. If you're going to really power through the season and finish comfortably in the top 2, it's quite a big ask. But again, they've got the 3rd best goals scored, the 3rd best goals against. So a lot of their stuff really finishes them in 3rd place. It's a fair position for what they've achieved in terms of in terms of those numerical statistics. So they have come straight down. They would have been expecting to be in and around the top 2, and for periods of the season they were in the top 2, but they made a lot of signings, a lot of big profile signings, and would have been expecting to finish up there, but they had that horrible week where they lost 3 in a row, and that allowed Leeds and Burnley to pull away at that point. And that reflects in the 10-point difference between the two. Albeit Sheffield United were deducted 2 points at the start of the season, but if everything had been done properly with Sheffield United, they wouldn't have been deducted 2 points. But in the end, those extra 2 points would have made no difference. So it can't be used as an excuse on face value now. So yeah, I don't think saying, some people might say that they've had an average season because of the expectation, but all of their stats kind of relate to third place, which is a good season. It's not great, and their playoff result definitely stops it being a great season. So there we go, really. Moving on to the Steel City blue side. Sheffield Wednesday finished 12th, 58 points. With the expectation, you see, it's all very similar to what was going on at QPR. Can I really say it's a good season for Sheffield Wednesday? I think the expectation would have been a little higher than maybe what they were able to achieve. It's a minus goal difference. They've lost more games than they won or drew. So I can't really say it's a good season, can I? I'll have to say average. There's too many negative metrics. 15 wins, 13 draws, 18 losses. So they've lost more than they've won, they've lost more than they've drawn. 60 goals scored ain't bad, but you've conceded 69. So again, a defence that's not great in the scheme of things. The team above Swansea conceded 56. It's quite a difference. And finished on 58 points. 8 points less, they might have been thinking of a relegation. And 8 points ain't a right lot in that scheme of things, is it? So, finished the season reasonably well with 1 win and 2 draws out of the last 5 games. But no, I don't think I'm being unfair by saying average. Moving on to Stoke, where did they finish? I'm going to say poor. Every season Stoke flatter to deceive, don't they? It's like, you expect just a little bit more from Stoke. They've been in the bottom half every season since they were relegated from the Premier League, and that feels a long time ago now. Certainly to me, anyway. In the days where Tony Pulis was keeping them afloat in the Premier League. So, with Stoke, they've finished on 12 wins, 15 draws and 19 losses. So again, they've like Sheffield Wednesday, they've lost more than they've won and drawn. But they've only scored 45 goals. That's poor. That is poor. Less than a goal a game. 62 conceded, quite a bit. Minus 17 goal difference, 51 points. They're only 1 point above that magic 50 for survival. I mean, should a club the size of Stoke be expecting more than just surviving in the Championship? I think at this point, maybe not. But yeah, I can't justify saying that they've had an average season. I really can't. So for me, it's poor. Sunderland. Now then, this is borderline between great and good, isn't it? Sunderland have achieved promotion via the playoffs, but their form, the last 5 games were all losses. But again, you could almost think of a mentality there is because they'd already secured 4th place. They secured 4th place with so many games to go, it was disgusting. But then when you look at it, it's a new manager that's never managed in England before with Lebris coming in. Overall, a very young squad. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say they've had a great season, because I don't think anyone expected Sunderland to be up there. I think a lot of people would have had Sunderland mid-table at best. They were shocking the season before. Really dirt average. Which for a club that has a stadium as big as it is, and quite a big fan base, and you look at some of the players they've had in the past with Kevin Phillips, absolute goal machine in the past. It's Peter Reid, bit of a legendary manager for Sunderland. And again, you could argue that form towards the end, is that good enough to justify them having a great season? I think the fact that they made up for that terrible form with the fact that they secured promotion in the playoffs, I don't think you can argue it. There were times as well when Sunderland were still in the running for the top two, just about. And they finished with 21 wins, 13 draws and 12 losses. I mean, they've won more than they've drawn. They've won more than they've lost. Plus, they've got a positive goal difference. 58 scored, 44 conceded. So they've conceded less than a goal a game. Scored comfortably more than a goal a game. Plus 14 goal difference. And 76 points, it's comfortably behind third place Sheffield United. But it's also comfortably ahead by 7 points. Comfortably ahead of Coventry in 5th. So, yeah, I think that with all of that in place, I think you have to say they've had a great season. Swansea, what have they had? I'm going to say good, I think. For Swansea, I had them very low down. I had them. I think I had them possibly getting relegated, or very close to it. I certainly had them down the bottom half. They finished in 11th, so reasonably comfortably top half when you look at it in the scheme of things. 61 points, scored 51 goals, conceded 56, which is that's going to drop your level. It's a minus goal difference at the end of the day. But 61 points, more than comfortable to keep them in the top half in the end. Sheffield Wednesday with 58, Norwich City in 13th, top of the bottom half with 57. So you've got to say that Swansea, 17 wins, 10 draws, 19 losses. It's a very mixed season, isn't it, with those kind of figures. But as I say, I had them and Cardiff down to struggle this season. Certainly, I had them both to be bottom half. So, you've got to say that in the scheme of things, it's a good season for Swansea. Certainly not great, not by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly better than average, I would say. Moving on to Watford. I'm going to say Watford's had a good season. And my reasoning for this is a little bit like Swansea. I had Watford pretty low down. And they actually stuck with Cleverley for a long time. Like, the Pozzos don't usually stick with managers very long, especially if they're not challenging for the top 6. So they've had a change of approach. Now you could argue that maybe it's an average season. Their form is dreadful in the last 5 games. It's 1 draw and 4 losses. 16 wins, 9 draws, 21 losses. 53 scored, 61 conceded, with a -8 goal difference and 57 points. When I look at that overall, I'm gonna change my mind. When looking at it a bit more, I'm dropping it down to average. Do those stats justify a good season for Watford? Bad form towards the end of the season, negative goal difference, more losses than either wins or draws. For a club the size of Watford, they'd be expecting top half, wouldn't they, really? And I know they weren't a million miles away, but yeah, I don't think that's an unfair drop. I think average, when you look at it in face value. a certain part of the season they were good. You know, they were having a good season, but there's a definite drop off there, and that's basically condemned them to the bottom half. I think Watford, if Watford had finished top half, I'd have kept them in good. But when looking at those stats in a bit more detail there, I don't think it's an unfair drop. That, sorry Watford. I mean, by all means, you know, do you think you've had a good season, or do you think it's been an average season, or do you think it's been poor? Do you think it should have been a lot better? Do please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Finally, West Brom, 9th. More wins than draws than losses. Positive goal difference. But for a team with that stature, yeah, I mean, it started well with Corberan, didn't it? And then when Carlos left, you know, I've had Carlos Corberan at Leeds. You know, he was the youth coach or youth manager, and then became one of Marcelo Bielsa's assistant managers or assistant coaches, if you like, of the first team. So I've seen how good a coach and manager Carlos Corberan is. So to lose him probably derailed the season. Again, they were very much draw merchants, weren't they? You know, with 19 draws, it's a lot of draws. See, I don't want to do a hasty move here like I just did with Watford. Definitely not a great season for West Brom because they didn't reach the playoffs, and I had them down to reach playoffs because I thought that getting Mowbray wasn't a terrible appointment. You know, with all that experience that Mowbray has, I thought he would have done the business there. But when you look at some of the stats, as I say, they've won and drawn more than they've lost. Positive goal difference, which, you know, Millwall had a minus, and West Brom's goal difference is better than Millwall, better than Blackburn, better than Bristol, better than Coventry, and then obviously better than all the ones below them. If they'd have reached playoffs, I'd have said possibly a great season, but I'm going to say good. Just the figures are too good to say average, even for a team of West Brom's stature in this division. But I don't think that's too unfair. I'd say good without, you know, it's like, you know, some people might say average because they'd expect a team of West Brom to finish in the top 6. You know, and a lot of their stats do go in their favour. You could argue the form is a little bit too indifferent. 2 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw in the last 5. But, you know, 64 points, same as Middlesbrough. And you see, like with Middlesbrough, I said it, like with Middlesbrough, it was an average season for them. But I would argue that, you know, when you look at it, it's 3 less losses, but it's 9 more draws and 6 less losses. Sorry, so 3 less wins, sorry, my apologies. 3 less wins, but it's 9 more draws and 6 less losses. They've scored less, but they've conceded less than Middlesbrough. So borderline between good and average, isn't it, for West Brom, I think. So yeah, I don't know. There's a couple of teams there that you could easily move around. You know, you could move them up 1 level, you could move them down 1 level. But I don't think that any of these rankings are particularly unfair. So yeah, I'll go with that in the end. You know, you could be very one-dimensional and move Plymouth down 1. But again, if you look at Plymouth's form, you know, Muslik got a tune out of that team, and they weren't his signings. Well, you know, apart from the January ones, you know, the summer signings weren't his, and you know, he was really trying to recover a shit show, if truth be told, from from the damage that Rooney had created. But at the same time, it's the owner's fault for appointing Rooney. So I don't know. And again, the expectations. You can't say Plymouth have got the same expectations as the likes of Cardiff and Luton. kind of, Luton were expecting, I had Luton top 2. I had Cardiff fairly low down, I think, but I don't think I had them. I might have had them relegated at one point. I don't know, but but in terms of the size of the club and the experience over the last, say 10 seasons or whatever, it's one of those, isn't it? But yeah, there we have it, folks. That is my grading of all 24 championship teams from the 24-25 season. Please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think that I've been fair with the gradings? Do you think that some other teams could have gone up one or down one? And if so, please give your reasons in the comments below. But in the meantime, do please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please give the video a like, really does help. And I'll see you next time for another video or live stream. So in the meantime, have a good one. See you later.